Dante Marchetti had never once, in 34 years, laid a hand on a woman in his own bed. Not out of virtue, out of superstition. His mother had died in a bed like his, waiting for a man who never came home, and Dante had promised the ghost of her that his sheets would stay clean, cold, and empty. That promise held through 9 funerals, 3 wars over the Boston waterfront, and a lifetime as underboss to the man who raised him. It held until a snowbound Thursday in February, when Dante walked into his own bedroom, unbuckling the shoulder holster he wore over his black turtleneck, and found a curvy stranger in blue scrubs curled on top of his duvet, one hand pressed against the pillow as if she had reached for someone in her sleep and found no one there. He did not draw his weapon. He did not shout for his men. He simply stood in the doorway and, for the first time since he was a boy, forgot how to breathe. He knew without turning that 2 of his soldiers were downstairs in the kitchen. He knew that a single word from him would empty this room in 90 seconds and leave no trace of the woman ever having entered it. He did not say the word. He would spend the next 12 weeks trying to understand why. And the woman herself, when she woke the next morning to find him watching her from an armchair he had not moved from all night, would spend the rest of her life trying to answer the same question. 2 mornings earlier, in a private study that smelled of pipe smoke and old leather, Salvatore Ianetti had coughed blood into a linen handkerchief and folded it away before Dante could see. Salvatore was 71, godfather of the North End, and the closest thing to a father Dante had ever known. He sat behind a walnut desk piled with unread ledgers, his skin the color of candle wax, his hands trembling around a rosary he had not touched in 40 years. "The doctors give me maybe 6 months," Salvatore said. "Maybe less. My heart is a rusted engine, Dante, and this family is a car nobody is steering." Dante lowered himself into the chair opposite. He did not offer comfort. Salvatore had raised him harder than that. "Tell me what you need." "I need you visible. Consigliere in title, boss in truth, until my son Marco is ready. Marco is not ready. Marco may never be ready." The old man's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "And I need a nurse, not a hospital, not strangers with clipboards writing my name into government files. A private nurse. Somebody quiet. Somebody who owes the world nothing and can be trusted to owe us everything." "I'll find you one." "I already found her. Her name is Rosalind Cavallo, 28. Trauma nurse at Mass General, on unpaid leave. She lost her hospital license 8 months ago after she gave a dying boy an extra dose of morphine his surgeon had refused to sign for. The boy passed peacefully. The board called it mercy and fired her anyway. Now she cannot work in any licensed facility in this state." Salvatore lifted a photograph from the desk and slid it across. "She has a younger sister with cystic fibrosis. The sister needs a lung transplant. Rosalind will do anything to buy her that transplant. Anything, Dante. She is the softest kind of desperate, which makes her the loyalist kind of employee." Dante looked at the photograph and felt something cold shift low in his chest. She was not beautiful in the way of magazine women. She was beautiful in the way of a warm, lit window on a freezing street. Dark curls, a soft, round jaw, hazel eyes that already looked tired of the world at 28. He set the photograph face down on the desk and folded his hands over it, as though covering a card he did not want the room to read. "Why me, Salvatore? Why my house?" Dante asked, though he already suspected he knew. The old man's eyes, milky at the edges but still sharp at the center, held his for a long moment. "Because you are the only man I know who will not want anything from her that she does not offer first. Marco would have her in a week. My brother's boys would have her by Friday. You, Dante, will not touch her at all. That is what she needs. That is what I need. And that, God help you, is what you have needed for 15 years, whether or not you have had the courage to say it out loud." Dante did not answer. He picked up the photograph again. Then he set it back down. "You want her at my house," Dante said finally, understanding. "You are safer than my house. Marco has been letting men through the front door I do not recognize. I trust you with my life, and now with what is left of it. She stays at your estate. I visit for treatments. Nobody outside these walls knows I am sick. If word reaches the Delacroix and Providence that my heart is failing, we will be at war before Easter. Dante stood. He buttoned his jacket. When does she arrive? Tonight, blizzard willing. Salvatore's hand closed around his forearm with surprising strength. One condition. She is not a woman to you. She is a nurse. Do you understand me, son? I have watched you keep that bedroom of yours empty for 15 years. I never asked why. I am not asking now. But do not let this be the woman who changes it. Her sister's lungs depend on her keeping her head down. Your family depends on you keeping yours. Dante met the old man's eyes. I have never touched a woman in my life who I did not have to, Salvatore. I am not about to start with yours. You have my word, and you have known the shape of my word since I was 14. Salvatore studied him a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and Dante left the study with the photograph face down in the pocket of his coat, because he could not quite bring himself to leave it on the old man's desk. Before we go further, if a story that opens with a promise this dangerous is your kind of story, tap that like button and subscribe. Stay with me. What Rosalind carries into that house is heavier than any pillow she sleeps on, and by the end of tonight, Dante Marchetti will break a vow he has kept since he was 19 years old. That night, as Rosalind Cavallo drove east on the interstate through a whiteout, she told herself 3 things in a row, in the voice she used on herself when she was performing chest compressions and needed to keep her hands from shaking. She told herself that this was a job. She told herself that the man on the other end of it was a client, and clients had names and addresses and nothing else. She told herself, most importantly, that she would not, under any circumstance, let herself feel anything for anyone in that house, because feelings were a luxury for people whose sisters were not dying, and she had traded that luxury away 6 years ago, the night the pulmonologist first said the word transplant. Rosalind Cavallo arrived at the wrought iron gate at 9:40 that night, with a duffel bag, a nurse's kit, and half a tank of gas she could not afford to refill. The estate rose from the snow like something out of a story her mother used to read her. Gray stone, black shutters, a single yellow window burning on the second floor. A man in a wool coat waved her through without checking her name. She realized, with a slow prickle at the back of her neck, that they had been watching for her car since the highway. She had not wanted to come. That was the honest truth, and she carried the honest truth into the foyer with her, tucked under the layer of professional calm she had learned to wear in emergency rooms at 3 in the morning. She had spent that afternoon at Emmy's hospice, holding a plastic cup of ice chips to her sister's cracked lips. Emmy, at 21, weighed 94 pounds. Her lungs sounded like wet paper. The transplant coordinator had used the word months in a sentence Rosalind was still trying to unhear. And so when a lawyer she did not know had called with an offer from a client he refused to name, and the number he mentioned had 4 more zeros than she had ever seen, Rosalind had said yes before he finished the sentence. Inside, a housekeeper named Mrs. Ferrante met her in a foyer of dark marble. Mrs. Ferrante was a small woman with silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She did not smile. "You do not ask questions," Mrs. Ferrante said, her voice low and even. "You do not answer the phone. You do not open doors. You do not go into the West Wing without permission. Mr. Marchetti sleeps in the master's suite on the 2nd floor. You will never enter it. Your patient's guest quarters are on the 3rd floor. Your own room is beside them. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Iannetti will not arrive until tomorrow. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow you work." Mrs. Ferrante's eyes softened by perhaps 1 degree. "Child, you look ready to fall over. 3rd floor, left at the top of the stairs. Bed is turned down. Go." Rosalind climbed. Her legs felt like water. She had driven 6 hours through a snowstorm from her sister Emmy's hospice room in western Massachusetts, and before that she had worked a double shift under the table at a nursing home that paid cash and asked no questions. She had not slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. Halfway up the 2nd flight, her hand found the banister and simply stopped there for a moment, because she was not certain her knees would hold if she let go. At the top of the stairs, she turned left. She counted doors. The 3rd door was slightly open, warm lamplight spilling into the hall, and inside she could see a made bed with a folded quilt and a glass of water on the nightstand. She went in. She sat on the edge of the mattress just to unlace her boots. She lay back to test the pillow. She was asleep before her second boot hit the floor. She did not know she had turned right instead of left. She did not know she was lying on top of Dante Marchetti's charcoal duvet, in the master suite of a man who had not shared a bed with anyone since he buried his mother. He came home at 11:20. He stopped in the doorway. He watched the slow rise and fall of her back beneath the blue scrubs, the way one dark curl had fallen across her cheek, the way her fist was closed tight around a corner of his pillow, as if she were afraid something might take it. He thought quite clearly and quite unwillingly that she looked like a woman who had been holding the world up alone for a very long time. He thought, less clearly, that he did not want to wake her. He crossed the room in silence. He set his gun in the drawer of the nightstand. He took the folded wool throw from the armchair by the window, and he laid it gently over her shoulders. Then he lowered himself into that armchair, still fully dressed, and he watched her sleep until the snow outside stopped falling and the sky went the pale gray of morning. Once, near 4, she made a soft sound in her sleep, and Dante's hand tightened on the arm of the chair as though she had called him by name. She had not. She had said very quietly, "Emmy, hold on." He did not touch her. He did not sleep. But something inside the 15-year vow shifted a quarter inch, and Dante Marchetti, who prided himself on knowing every angle of every room he entered, did not hear it move. Rosalind woke to sunlight and the smell of cedar. Her first thought was that the ceiling was wrong. Her second was that a man was sitting in a chair 6 feet from her, drinking coffee from a white mug, watching her with eyes the color of storm water. She sat up so fast the room tilted. "Oh my God. Oh my God, I am so sorry. I turned the wrong way. I thought this was—" "You turned right instead of left," Dante said. His voice was quiet. It filled the room anyway. "Mrs. Ferrante is going to be furious with herself for not walking you up. Please do not tell her. She is 72 and she takes correction hard." Rosalind gripped the edge of the mattress. Her heart was banging so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Are you going to fire me?" "No." "Are you going to hurt me?" Something passed across his face. It was gone before she could name it. "No, Miss Cavallo. I am going to give you 5 more minutes to wake up, and then I am going to walk you down to breakfast, and then Salvatore Ionetti is going to arrive, and you are going to become the most important employee in this house. Do you understand me?" She nodded. She did not understand him at all. He rose. At the door he paused, one hand on the frame, and without turning he said, "You talk in your sleep. You said the name Emmy, twice." Then he was gone, and Rosalind sat alone in a stranger's bed, in a stranger's house, with tears running down her face that she could not entirely explain. Only one thing was clear to her, and she felt it settle in her chest with a small, precise click. The man who owned this bed had watched her sleep for 7 hours and had not laid a finger on her. In her whole life, she was not sure a single man had ever chosen her comfort over his own that plainly. Salvatore arrived at noon in a black sedan, walking under his own power but pale as chalk. Rosalind met him in the sunroom that Dante had converted overnight into a small clinic. Oxygen tank, IV stand, cardiac monitor, a locked cabinet of medications Rosalind had signed for and counted twice. She took the old man's blood pressure. She listened to his heart. She did not flinch at what she heard, and she did not lie about what it meant. "How long, honestly?" Salvatore asked. "If you rest, if you follow the medication schedule exactly, if you do not climb stairs and you do not argue with anyone, maybe a year." "And if I do all the things I am going to do anyway?" Rosalind hesitated. 4 months, maybe 5. Salvatore laughed. It turned into a cough. She held the basin. When he could speak again, he said, "You are the first person in this house who has told me the truth in 6 weeks. Do not stop. Not when it is easier to lie. Not when Dante asks you a question you know I would rather he did not hear the answer to. Especially then." Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm formed. Rosalind woke at 6. She drew Salvatore's blood. She prepared his medications. She read to him from the Boston Globe because his eyes were failing and he was too proud to admit it. Dante came and went at hours that seemed to have no pattern, but she noticed, she could not help noticing, that he was almost always at the estate between 8 and 9 at night, the hour when Salvatore took his evening pills, and asked her to sit with him a while. Dante did not enter the sunroom. He stood in the doorway. He listened. Sometimes he brought her a mug of coffee, set it on the side table, and left without a word. Once, when Salvatore fell asleep mid-sentence, Dante caught the book before it hit the floor. Once, when Rosalind cut her finger opening an ampule of magnesium, he was in the doorway with a bandage in his hand before she had finished swearing under her breath, and he wrapped the finger himself, badly, with a tenderness that seemed to embarrass him more than it did her. When he finished, he held her hand a beat too long, and then he set it down on the table between them as if it were made of glass, and he walked out without saying goodnight, and she did not see him again for 2 days. "You are gentler than they say you are," Rosalind whispered, the next time he stood in her doorway. "I am exactly as they say I am," Dante answered. "I am only gentler in this room." She learned things about him she was not supposed to learn. She learned that he read actual books in Italian, worn along the spines. She learned that he had a habit of touching the doorframe of the sunroom with his knuckles before he stepped away, a small superstition she suspected he did not know he was performing. She learned that on the 2 nights a week he stayed at the estate to eat dinner with Salvatore, he made the coffee himself, and he made it the way she liked it, without ever having been told. On the 15th night, everything changed. Salvatore had a bad episode at 2 in the morning. Rosalind was already awake, reviewing his chart by the light of a small lamp, when the monitor began to shriek. She was inside the sunroom in 10 seconds. Salvatore was gray. His lips were blue. She got the oxygen mask on him and pushed a dose of furosemide through his line, and then she climbed onto the daybed beside him and held his shoulders up, because at that angle his lungs could drain, and she stayed there talking to him low and steady for 40 minutes until the color came back into his face. She counted his pulse against the seconds on her own watch. She counted the drops in the IV line. She counted, without meaning to, the times Dante's shadow shifted in the doorway. Dante was in the doorway the whole time. He never crossed the threshold. He never spoke. When it was over, when Salvatore had drifted into an exhausted, breathing sleep, Rosalind stepped out into the hall, and her knees buckled. Dante caught her before she hit the floor. His arms went around her ribs. She could feel the shape of a holster beneath his shirt. She could feel his heart, and it was hammering, and she realized with a strange, dizzy certainty that he had been afraid the entire 40 minutes. Afraid of losing the old man. Afraid maybe of something else. "He is my father," Dante said into the dark hallway. It was not an explanation. It was a confession. "He is not my father by blood. He took me in when I was 14 years old with a broken jaw and a dead mother, and he has been my father every day since. If I lose him, I lose the last person on this earth who knew me before I became what I am." Rosalind lifted her face. She was crying and she did not care. "He is not going to die tonight," she said. "I promise you that." Dante looked at her the way a man in a burning building looks at a window. Then he let her go, and he stepped back and he said, in a voice she barely recognized, "Miss Cavallo, if I keep standing here, I am going to break a vow I made when I was 19 years old. Please, go to bed." She went. She did not sleep. She lay in the third-floor room she had never once used and stared at the ceiling and listened to the pipes tick. And she thought about how a man who had killed people, she had no illusions about that, she had seen the way his men looked at him, could be undone by an old man's slow heart, and a nurse who had already decided not to fall in love with him. She had already decided. She promised herself that, at 4 in the morning, 3 times in a row. It did not take. Trouble found the estate on a Sunday, and it did not knock. His name was Marco Ionetti, and he was Salvatore's only son by blood. 39, handsome in a soft-jawed way, resentful in the way of a man who has always been told he is not quite enough. He arrived with 2 men Dante did not recognize, and a bottle of wine he had not been asked to bring. He kissed Rosalind's hand at the door and held it a second too long. "So this is the miracle worker," Marco said, "the one keeping my father alive. My father who no longer sees fit to call me. My father who has apparently signed powers of attorney I have not been shown. Tell me, nurse, is my father dying? Or is he merely being kept dying, for as long as suits certain people in this house? Your father is dying, Mr. Iannetti, Rosalind said, in a voice so even it surprised her. He would like to do it on his own terms. My job is to help him with that. That is all my job is. Marco smiled without warmth. And when he dies, nurse, what is your job then? Then I go home to my sister. Do you? Marco tilted his head. Because from where I stand, you look like a woman who has already picked a side in a war she does not understand. Dante appeared behind Rosalind so quietly that Marco startled. Your father is resting. He will see you in an hour. Rosalind, please take Salvatore his 3 o'clock medication. Rosalind left. She did not run. Behind her, she heard Marco say, low and ugly, You are going to hand me this family, Dante, or I am going to take it. And that little nurse of yours is not going to be around long enough to see who wins. At 4 that afternoon, Rosalind was walking a tray of tea to the sunroom when a man she had never seen stepped out of the pantry and closed a gloved hand over her mouth. The tray hit the floor. She kicked, she bit. He was strong, and he smelled of cigarettes, and he was dragging her toward the service door when Dante came around the corner of the corridor. Dante did not shout. He did not fire. He crossed the 12 feet between them in what seemed to Rosalind a single stride, and he broke the man's arm at the elbow with a sound she would hear for weeks. The man screamed. Dante dropped him. Dante put himself between Rosalind and the doorway, and only then did he look at her. And only then did she see, in the way his jaw worked, that he was not entirely a man in that moment. He was something older and quieter and much more dangerous. Are you hurt? He asked. No. Did he touch you anywhere? No, Dante, no. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he was Dante again. He knelt. He picked up her teapot, which had, miraculously, not shattered. He set it upright on the tray. He walked her to the sunroom with a hand at the small of her back that she did not feel until she was already inside the door, and by then it was too late to notice how much she had needed it. That night, Salvatore called them both into the study. He looked at Rosalind. He looked at Dante. He looked at the space between them, which had become, in the 15 days since she arrived, its own small country. Marco has moved against me, the old man said quietly. The man who took Rosalind was one of his. He hoped to trade her for my chair. He does not understand yet that he has already lost, because the moment he touched her, Dante decided how this ends. Salvatore, Dante began. No, listen to me, both of you. Salvatore lifted the rosary from the desk and set it down again. I am dying. I have made my peace with that. What I have not made peace with is watching this family pass to a boy who would send a stranger to grab a woman off my nurse's tray. So I am changing the succession. Tonight. In writing. In front of the 2 capos I trust most, who are downstairs in the kitchen eating my food. Rosalind's hand found the back of a chair. Dante, Salvatore continued, you will be boss, not consigliere, boss. Marco will be given a house in Sicily, a monthly allowance, and no vote. If he comes home in a box. This is not negotiable. And me? Rosalind whispered. Salvatore's eyes softened. You, child, are the only person in this house I trust to tell my new boss the truth when he does not want to hear it. Which means you are the only person I trust to keep him alive after I am gone. Your sister's transplant is already funded. The money moved this morning. That was never in question. What I am asking now is different. I am asking you to stay. Rosalind looked at Dante. Dante was looking at the floor. His hands, which had broken a man's arm 4 hours ago, were trembling. If you are still with me, and you feel what I feel in this scene, do me one small favor before we go on. Tell me in the comments what you would do if you were Rosalind in this room. Stay for the man or run for the sister. There is no wrong answer, and I am reading every one of them. Marco did not go quietly. Of course he did not. 3 nights later, the power at the estate went out at 11:14 p.m. Rosalind was in the sunroom with Salvatore, adjusting his oxygen. The monitor died. The overhead lights died. From somewhere in the West Wing, she heard the flat, unmistakable crack of a pistol, and then another, and then the terrible silence that comes after gunfire when you are trying to guess who has stopped breathing. Salvatore's hand closed on her wrist. His grip was iron. "Get under the daybed, now. Do not come out until Dante tells you to." "Salvatore. Rosalind, please." She dropped to the floor. She crawled under the daybed. She pulled the trailing edge of the blanket down to hide herself. She heard footsteps. She heard a door bang open. She heard Marco's voice, loud and slurred and terrible. "Pop, come on, enough games. Tell me where he keeps the ledgers and I will let the nurse walk out of here." "She is not here, Marco. She left this afternoon." "You are a bad liar, Pop." Rosalind heard the sound of a man striking another man across the face. She heard Salvatore grunt. She heard the soft, wet sound of blood on the floor. And she made a decision. She was a trauma nurse. She had been under fire once, in a Boston ER on a very bad Saturday night. She knew where the emergency epinephrine auto-injectors were kept, because she had inventoried them herself that first morning, and again every Sunday since. She knew that a dose meant for cardiac arrest, driven into the side of a healthy man's neck, would spike his heart rate so violently he would lose motor control for 30 seconds. 30 seconds was a lot of time. 30 seconds was, if you were careful, everything. She slid out from under the daybed. She reached the cabinet. She palmed the injector. She stood up behind Marco, who was leaning over his father with a raised hand, and she drove the needle into the side of his throat and pressed the plunger. Marco went rigid. His eyes rolled. He crashed sideways into the oxygen tank. His pistol skittered across the floor. Rosalind kicked it under the daybed and dropped to her knees beside Salvatore, whose lip was split and whose left cheek was already swelling, but whose eyes were open and furious and alive. Dante came through the door 2 seconds later, gun raised, and stopped. Blood was on his shirt, and it was not his own. There was a shallow cut along his temple that he had not yet noticed. He was breathing hard, and his eyes went first to Salvatore, and then to Rosalind, and then to Rosalind again, and stayed there. He looked at his convulsing rival on the floor. He looked at the empty syringe in Rosalind's hand. He looked at Salvatore, bloody and grinning. "She saved my life, son," the old man rasped. "With a needle. Marry her before somebody smarter does." Dante did not laugh. He did not smile. He knelt beside Rosalind, and he took her free hand, and he pressed his forehead against her knuckles, and he stayed there while his men flooded the room and lifted Marco and carried him away to somewhere Rosalind chose not to ask about. When Dante finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet, and neither of them mentioned it, then or ever. Salvatore Ionetti died 6 weeks later, in his own bed, at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, with Rosalind's hand on his wrist and Dante's hand on his shoulder. He was smiling. He had eaten a whole bowl of his mother's minestrone the night before, from a recipe Rosalind had found in a drawer and cooked herself, and he had told Dante he was proud of him, and he had told Rosalind that she was the daughter he had been praying 30 years for. He said all of this in a voice thin as paper, but he said it clearly, and he said it while he was still himself, which is more than most men get. They buried him on a Saturday. Dante wore black. Rosalind wore gray, because Salvatore had once told her that black at a funeral was for people who did not know the person well enough to grieve them in color. The north end came out in a slow, silent tide. Marco did not come. Marco was in Palermo, alive, watched, and permanently unwelcome. That was the mercy Dante had chosen, and Rosalind had not asked him to explain it, because she understood by then that his mercies were the most private thing about him. That night, after the last guest had gone and the kitchen was quiet, and Mrs. Ferrante had gone to bed with a glass of grappa and a photograph of her late husband, Dante found Rosalind in the sunroom. She was packing the medical cabinet into a cardboard box, folding each blister pack of pills as if it were a letter. "Emmy's surgery is Thursday," she said without turning. "The lungs came in this morning. A 22-year-old from New Hampshire. His family said yes. I fly out at 6. I know. I arranged the car." "Of course you did." She turned. She had not been crying, but she looked as if she had been, weeks ago, and had simply not put the face away yet. Dante stood in the doorway in a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She could see the edge of an old scar on his forearm that she had never asked about. "I am not asking you to stay," he said quietly. "Your sister needs you in Boston, and this house is going to be a war zone for 6 months while I settle what Salvatore left me. I would not bring a person I loved into that. But I am asking you a different question. When the war is done, when Emmy is breathing on her own lungs, when you have slept for a solid month and you remember what your own face looks like in a mirror, would you come back? Not as a nurse, not as an employee. Come back and see if there is a version of this house that has you in it." Rosalind set the last blister pack in the box. She crossed the room. She stopped 1 foot in front of him. She lifted her hand and pressed her palm flat to the center of his chest, over the place where she knew, from 15 days of listening at doorways, his heart lived. "Dante Marchetti," she said. "I turned right instead of left on my first night in this house, and I have been thinking, for 6 weeks, that maybe I did not turn the wrong way at all. Ask me again in the spring, when Emmy is walking without a cannula, when you can stand in a room with me and not look at the door. Ask me then, and I will answer you honestly. That is not a yes. It is not a no." He closed his eyes. He rested his forehead against hers. He did not kiss her. He had made her a promise, in a doorway, about a vow he was 19 years old when he took, and he was going to keep the shape of that promise until she came back to him on her own 2 feet, with her sister breathing behind her, and released him from it. "In the spring," he said. "In the spring." She left at 6 the next morning. Dante watched her car turn out of the gate through the same second-floor window where, on her first night, a single yellow lamp had burned to guide her in. He did not sleep in his own bed that night, or the night after. He slept in the armchair by the window, the wool throw across his knees, the way he had slept the first night she came, because the bed still smelled faintly of her hair, and he was not yet ready to let that go. Emmy Cavallo took her first unassisted breath on a Thursday in April at a hospital in Boston, with her sister holding one hand and a stranger's lungs unfolding gently in her chest. She cried. Rosalind cried harder. In a waiting room down the hall, a florist delivered a single white peony to the nurse's station with no card, and every nurse on the floor knew, without being told, whom it was for. Rosalind carried it back to Emmy's recovery room and set it in a plastic cup of water beside the bed, and Emmy, still hoarse from the ventilator, whispered, "Is he the reason I can breathe, Roz?" Rosalind did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, "He is the reason a lot of things, Em. Go back to sleep." 6 weeks after that, on the first genuinely warm afternoon of the year, a black sedan pulled up in front of a small brick apartment building in Somerville. Dante Marchetti stepped out. He was carrying a single white peony, and Rosalind, watching from her third-floor window with her sister's inhalers still warm in her pocket, understood that he had been carrying one every week since she left, and simply throwing them away at the end of each Thursday if she did not answer the door. She opened it that day. He looked, she thought, like a man who had walked a very long way home. She did not say yes on the doorstep. She said yes 6 months later, on a September evening in a garden Salvatore had planted himself 30 years earlier, with Emmy laughing behind them in a dress the color of new leaves. And when Dante lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, and finally, for the first time in his life, led a woman across the threshold of his own bedroom, Rosalind understood something she had not quite understood before. He had not been waiting for a woman. He had been waiting for a person he trusted enough to become one again. If this story moved you, if you felt the door open at the end the way I did when I first imagined it, leave a heart in the comments and tell me, do you think Rosalind was always going to come back, from the first night she turned right instead of left? I read every answer, and I will see you in the next story.